Hello, everyone. Welcome to day 2 of the first ever RSPO North America Sustainable Palm Oil Dialogue. My name is Cameron Plesh. I'm the U.S. representative for the RSPO. While we wait a few minutes for all of the other attendees to join us, please take a moment to answer the poll question that you should see on your screen now, and we'll share the results for that before we begin. See a lot of other attendees joining now. Thank you for joining. Again, for those of you that are just joining us, you should see a poll question on your screen. Please take a moment to answer that while we wait for the other attendees to log in, and we'll share those results before we begin. All right, we're going to go ahead and get started here, but wanted to quickly share the poll results for those of you that were able to answer. It's great to see that a lot of you already have deforestation policies with your organization, or you're at least planning to. This will be a great session to be able to learn a little bit more about deforestation policies and how you can put it into implementation and action. So happy all of you are able to join us. Welcome again. And thank you for taking the time to join us for this great panel. Again, this is the first ever North America Sustainable Palm Oil Dialogue brought to you by the RSPO, and this is the third panel for this conference. My name is Cameron Plesh, and I am the U.S. representative for the RSPO. So beginning yesterday and then continuing over the next 2 days, this digital conference is hosting a series of webinar sessions covering a wide range of important topics with a focus on how North American stakeholders can make an impact. And I'm honored and excited to introduce this session today on deforestation in the downstream, from policies to implementation. But before we begin the session today, just a little bit of housekeeping for everybody. So all of you, all the attendees are in listen only mode, with only the panelists and moderator being visible and audible. However, we still really want to hear from all of you. So throughout the session, please type your questions into the questions box located in the menu bar. We'll be asking as many of the questions as we can throughout the session and during the dedicated Q&A session, which will take place following the panel discussions. Please let us know if your question is directed towards one of the individuals on the panel or if it's directed towards everybody. And although this conference was originally planned to be in person, for obvious reasons, we're all joining each other from around the world today. So please bear with us if there are any technical challenges that we might face. So with that, I'd like to introduce our moderator for this session, which will be Nigel Sizer. Nigel is the Chief Program Officer for the Rainforest Alliance, a role that he shifted into in 2008, after 2018, when he was the president of the Rainforest Alliance for 2 years. While serving as president, he helped lead the successful merger with the leading Dutch-based nonprofit UTS, and he's also served as the global director of the forest program at the World Resource Institute, where he helped launch the award-winning Global Forest Watch and Global Restoration Initiative. He's also served in a lot of other leadership roles, including being the lead advisor on climate change and energy issues in Asia to former US President Bill Clinton. He worked with the United Nations Environment Program, and he also established the Nature Conservancy's Asia Pacific Forest Program. Nigel, thank you for joining us, and over to you.
Thank you, Cameron, and thank you, RSPO, for organizing this wonderful event and this great session. Deforestation and the downstream, from policies to implementation. We all know that deforestation is a serious issue for palm oil. It attracts a lot of attention and a lot of controversy. Palm oil loves to grow in the same places that lowland tropical rainforests also love to grow. And so this causes quite a few issues as palm oil production expands in some parts of the world. This panel is going to focus on what is being done to address that, on some of the successes and progress in addressing this challenge. And we have a fantastic group of panelists to take us on this journey and discuss this with us. So I will just briefly introduce them, and then we'll go into the discussion. So first of all, we have Rachael Sherman, who is the Director of Global Sustainability for McDonald's Corporation. And Rachael leads all of the company's work on forests and on sustainable palm oil, and leads their sustainability engagement in the 89 McDonald's franchised markets globally. I assume Rachael spends a lot of time on Zoom calls these days. And Katie Thomason is the Senior Coordinator for Sustainable Palm Oil Markets for Conservation International. Previously, she was a field researcher with the University of Idaho and also worked with the US Forest Service. And finally, we're really happy to have joining us from Guatemala, Jose Roberto Montenegro, who is a Senior Executive General Manager with AgroAmerica, which is a world-class palm oil grower and exporter based in Guatemala. And in 2010, I'm very proud to say that they were the first company in the world to become RA certified for their palm oil with Rainforest Alliance. And in 2014, they were the first company in Central America to be certified by the RSPO. So those were tremendous achievements, and his company has been a front runner on these issues. And Jose Roberto also now serves on the board of the RSPO. So thank you so much, Jose Roberto, for joining us. The first question that I have, and we'll start with Katie on this, and then go to Rachael and Jose Roberto, is why does tropical deforestation matter to North American companies when we're so far removed from where that deforestation is taking place? And Rachael and Jose Roberto, if you can say a little bit about why it's so important, particularly for your companies, that this be addressed. But Katie, you go ahead.
Sure, thanks, Nigel. And thanks, RSPO, for hosting us today. Bottom line, deforestation contributes significantly to climate change, which affects all of us. And the good news is forests are a huge part of that solution to climate change. We know from the latest science, there's a very narrow window for us to really change course and solve these big global issues and meet this global target for solving climate change. And so, you know, there's also over 30% of climate mitigation action needed that could be met through natural climate solutions. And that's just a big fancy term that means protecting, managing, restoring high carbon ecosystems like forests. So, you know, forests are a huge opportunity for us in this, addressing this as a climate issue. Yeah.
That's great. Thanks, Katie. Rachael, over to you.
Yeah, thanks so much. And can you hear me okay, Nigel? I had to make some changes. Yeah. Okay, great, thanks. So while McDonald's is based in North America, our headquarters is in Chicago. We're a global company, and we're operating and restaurants and sourcing raw materials from all over the world. We operate in more than 120 countries. So this really impacts our business all around the world, including in North America. And it matters because we hear it's important for our customers. We hear it's important for stakeholders like investors who ask us about these topics. And we know it matters to our business. Like Katie said, this is a big part of climate change, and climate change directly impacts our ability to source food for our restaurants. So it's critically important for McDonald's.
Thank you, Rachael. Jose Roberto.
Thank you, Neil, and thank you for your kind words at the beginning. Deforestation to be a concern for everyone. Firstly, the impacts of deforestation adversely impact the global warming and account somewhere between 12 or 14% of GHG emission per year. The climate and the air that we breathe is borderless. And what goes on in Latin America, in the tropical belt, it will affect Canadians, Americans, or Africans. And this is a key issue for us. For a company in Latin America, US and Canada are an essential market for palm oil, big enough to drive behavior along the supply chain. And if the issue of deforestation is taken seriously by this region, Latin American countries and companies with excellent sustainability performance will be available to supply the demand on a benefit for geographically position.
Thank you, Jose Roberto. I'll stick with you as we go on to the second question here. And by the way, do people who are listening in, please do share your questions, and Cameron's going to be posting them, and I'll be monitoring those as they come up, and we'll go to some of those as we go through here. Jose Roberto, how is your company working to address this issue and this risk?
As you previously mentioned it, in 2008, we started with the process to achieve our first certification. And thank you to Rainforest Alliance to help us and open the door, because at that time, any company around the world can reach the certification for palm oil. That helped us to put the first level, and then finally, after 5 years, we happily reached the RSPO, as you mentioned, the fourth company in the world, IP, and the first company in Central America. Currently, our supply chain, 80% of our supply chain is IP certified, and we are trying to reach 100% in the next 2 years, I would say.
Thank you, Jose Roberto. Rachel, tell us about what McDonald's is doing.
Yes, so we started by setting commitments. We set a number of commitments on different priority commodities to support sustainable production, and palm oil was one of those. And then in 2014, we signed the New York Declaration on Forests, which covers a number of commodities, including palm oil. And then after that, McDonald's also set our own commitment on forests, which outlined the work that we would do to achieve our targets. And what we did specifically was work with our supply chain to understand where our impacts are, create procurement tools in our supply chain, so integrating our expectations on forests into our raw material specifications, for example, integrating expectations with our suppliers, which is very business focused, but it's, I think, a necessary part of achieving these targets, integrating it into supply chain processes. And specifically, our expectations were to purchase certified palm oil through the RSPO and increase our purchases of physically certified oil. And then we also have done a lot of work to be able to measure our progress globally and then report that publicly through our website and then through different scorecards like CDP for us. And I just wanted to say, in the time that we've been doing this, I think a lot of great resources have been developed. There's a lot out there for you to use that's ready-made. And suppliers of palm oil are really experts in this space. So if you're buying palm oil, you can really lean on your suppliers as experts to support you in the journey.
Thank you, Rachel. Katie, listening to Jose Roberto and Rachel, what are your reflections on this and what North American companies should be doing on this issue?
I think there's two key areas where companies can really have an influence on deforestation and impacts globally. The first is those supply chain commitments, which we've already heard from our other panelists speaking to what they're doing through those dynamics. And, you know, if you haven't developed a commitment around sourcing sustainably around NDP, that's a good place to start. And the good news is there's so many resources out there today to help. The accountability framework is a good one in terms of creating a commitment as well as the processes involved in actually implementing that. But a lot of companies have already made that commitment. They're working towards greater transparency, towards reporting on progress, and that's all very important. But equally as important is the supply chain action is going beyond your supply chain towards collective action. And what we mean by that is, you know, looking beyond your company to address the systemic factors that contribute to deforestation and allow deforestation continue that are outside of any one company's control or even multiple companies' control. It's getting involved in multi-stakeholder collaborative approaches such as a jurisdictional approach, which brings together civil society, private sector, and government as a key stakeholder to solve these issues like deforestation at scale. It's looking at how can we achieve this, not just through one supplier, multiple suppliers, but across a landscape, across an entire region. I think that's really key as we move into this next decade of action.
Yeah, thanks, Katie. This starts to sound quite daunting, quite complicated though, pretty quickly. We heard Jose Roberto and Rachel talking about some of the things that they're doing. A lot of that sort of very directly under their control, where they have a lot of influence and leverage. You're starting to talk about being engaged in these wider processes, entire landscapes, entire countries, the wider responsibility, and we know that's a very important part of this story. Rachel, coming back to you, what would be your advice for companies who are still early in this process, who are perhaps at the point where they're saying, we need to do something about this? Goodness me, where do we start? What's your suggestions for them?
I would just echo what Katie said just now, that there's a lot available for you. So don't be too daunted, even though it's a large task. Of course, it takes a lot of investment and time. But I think the accountability framework is a great place to start, because they've really outlined for companies what are the expectations, what are the steps you do to develop a roadmap, and broken it down in a very clear way. I would also suggest that you find support to do this work from the experts that are available. So it might be consultants, it could be NGO partners that can advise you. And then again, like I said, your suppliers are really experts, so you can also engage with them and get their support. What I would say is companies need to address both their own supply chain and that wider transformational change, and that they're related, but both need to be done. So the first step would be to map your supply chain, which in and of itself can be very complicated to get the data to find out where palm oil is used in a large or small company can be very challenging. So I think figuring out what is your footprint, where are you buying, where are you using this palm oil first, so that you can address your supply chain, and then in parallel start engaging in these multi-stakeholder groups like jurisdictional approaches. The RSPO has great conferences. There's other conferences on forests. So I think that there's a lot you can do, and you don't need to do everything at once. It can be a stepwise approach.
Yeah, thanks, Rachel. And what we've seen recently, another question for you on this, quite a few companies set a target of 2020. They said by 2020 we'll be deforestation free, or some variation on that. It turned out to be more complicated. Many of them didn't achieve that target. Companies now sort of revisiting this or starting out will feel the value of setting some kind of target, or pressure from stakeholders to set a target and be clear about that. What's your approach at McDonald's to setting those targets? How do you go for a real stretch target? How concerned are you about that aspect?
I think, we've learned a lot about setting targets over the last few years, especially as we move into 2020, which is a year we're working on achieving a lot of our targets. One thing that we've learned is we've made a shift really to more outcome-based target. So looking at topics like deforestation or like science-based targets for climate change, targets that are focused on driving outcomes, measurable, data-driven outcomes on the biggest issues that are facing us today. And I think that shift is really important, because you can demonstrate that you're moving the needle in a way that's really meaningful versus achieving targets for the sake of achieving targets. I think that they have to be ambitious, and in order to really make change, they need to be challenging and ambitious, and that means that companies may fall short sometimes. And my feeling about that is that we should celebrate the successes that we've seen. Like Jose Roberto was saying, achieving 80% identity preserved supply chain is really significant and should be celebrated, I think, more than the 20% that isn't yet there. And we should keep pushing for more progress, because of course we need to see more progress to make sure this change really occurs. So I think we should focus on both celebrating the success and pushing for more targets and continue to push on the ambition. I think that's very important.
Yeah, thank you, Rachel. I think our experience with Rainforest Alliance very much supports the advice that you're giving there. Jose Roberto, if you're still there, I think, what advice would you give to companies starting out on this journey from the producer side of the story? I'm not sure if Jose Roberto, we can't hear you, Jose, if you're muted. Otherwise, I'll just carry on here. All right, we seem to be having a technical difficulty. Oh, no, here he comes. There he is. Jose Roberto, what would be your advice to companies on the producer side who are, yes, can hear you now, on the producer side who are starting out on this journey?
Well, I think the first step is to get knowledge on the issue by reading reports or engaging with relevant people or initiatives. And I have to say that it's a good step to be a RSPO member. Then try to know where your palm oil comes from, your suppliers, the suppliers of your suppliers, and so on, until you know the mills that produce the palm oil that you are using. Then develop a policy of sustainability sourcing, in which you say clearly to your suppliers that you expect to get RSPO certified, which delivers deforestation-free palm oil. If your current suppliers are not or don't show effective, will deliver to you, change the supplier, or try to work with them. And finally, give preferences to supplier mills located in countries where palm oil is not associated with deforestation. There are some good examples in Latin America.
Thank you, Jose Roberto. There's a question here that came in from the audience that that's directed to you. How are other companies following the example of AgroAmerica there in Guatemala or in Central America? What sort of reaction do you get? Are other companies resistant to this in your experience?
Well, I think RSPO has done a very nice move in open a Latin American office recently, or 5 years ago, with Francisco Naranjo leading the office with great team, and currently the path to get certified is easier. I think many companies in Latin America is reaching that target, and everybody is willing to help each other to be certified.
Thank you, Jose Roberto. That's great. Rachel, a question came in. You sort of answered it already, but maybe have another run at this one. This is coming in from Chris Lyon with 7th Generation, and he's asking, what are some of the ready-made resources McDonald's has used for success?
Yes. So I've mentioned a few times the accountability framework. I think that's a great place to start, and they have a website that you can look at, including webinars. CDP is another, CDP Forest specifically is another one. You can go to their website and they have a lot of webinars available. The RSPO, of course, has webinars and meetings like this, as well as a lot of guides. We work with the World Wildlife Fund as the global partner, who have a lot of resources on their website, as well as ProForest, who offer resources. And then personally, when I was starting in the forest work, I attended a few of the Innovation Forum conferences, and I thought that those were great places because they're off the record. You often got quite a candid, honest, open conversation, which I found very helpful, just speaking to other businesses. Oh, and the other thing I'd say is if it's useful or interesting, I'm available if you ever want to have a conversation or exchange over email. I can definitely share my contact details.
That's fantastic, Rachel. There's 92 people listening, so you might get a few people taking you up on that in the next few minutes. I just put a link in the chat to everyone. You should be able to see that with the link to the Accountability Framework website, which does have a lot of resources that should make it easier to start on this journey. Katie, any advice from you to companies who are starting out on this, setting targets, these things we've been discussing?
Sure, I definitely agree with what Rachel mentioned about, understanding your supply chain first, and looking at your footprint, understanding what products have palm oil in them, where you're sourcing from, and using that as a basis and a starting point for developing your commitment, and also thinking about how you can get to that engagement piece as well, that collective action piece, what regions that your products are coming from, and engaging in those places in a real way. And definitely second, the resources mentioned, Accountability Framework is a great place to start. Conservation International, we also have resources available, and also happy to just chat offline around what this means, where to get started, and how to think about this. Yeah, but there's definitely a lot more resources available now. And also there's the North American Sustainable Palm Oil Network, NASPON, which is a great place to get plugged into. And we're actually creating resources, educational resources, and thinking through different aspects of getting to that 100% sustainable palm oil commitment. So lots out there.
Great, thank you, Katie. There's another question coming in for Jose Roberto here. You're a popular guy, from David Burns at NWF, a very important North American nonprofit, and he says, how can North American stakeholders help build capacity in Latin America and support the production of sustainable palm oil?
Can you repeat it again? Sorry.
How can stakeholders in North America, so the NGOs up here and others who are concerned about these issues, how can we help you in Latin America and others to build capacity and increase production of sustainable palm oil? What can we do on this end that's helpful to you?
Well, I think we have a lot of work to do in Latin America, especially with smallholders. Smallholders is a key issue for the sustainability, not only in Latin America, also in the world. As you may know, 50% of the total production comes from smallholders. And I think it should be a great idea if stakeholders from North America focus on that target, because they really need help. Big companies around Latin America are trying to do the best in order to push them and raise the target. But definitely, I would say that smallholders need the most important help right now.
So focus on smallholders and getting support to that part of the supply chain is the greatest need. Yeah, that's also our view at Rainforest Alliance, very much so, and the emphasis of our work going forward as well. Let's see, so I encourage you again to put some questions in here, and I'll see those coming up on the screen. We've got some more time for questions and answers coming up. And in the meantime, just sort of the final question I have to each of the panelists is, what would be a story of success that you would like to share? Something in your work that you've seen that helps to motivate you, that keeps you going. We know that this can be really challenging and frustrating sometimes. What's the success that you have in mind that you would like to share with us? And I'll start with Katie, and then Rachel, and then Jose Roberto. Go ahead, Katie.
One thing that's been really inspiring for me in my work is seeing this idea of collective action in action. I've seen this with the Coalition for Sustainable Livelihoods, a multi-stakeholder initiative that we're involved in Aceh and North Sumatra. It's a jurisdictional initiative bringing together private sector stakeholders, civil society, and government as a key stakeholder as well. And we all have slightly different interests or angles, but we've all been able to align around a common core around improving livelihoods and its connection to natural resources and production. And we had a workshop this past October, and it was a 2-day workshop. About 130 people attended, and we ran late the first day. It was after 5 p.m. We still had another session to go, and we posed it to the group. We said, you know, if you want, we can keep working, push through, or we can wait until tomorrow and pick back up where we left off. And this group of over 100 people voted to stay late into the early evening to get into small groups and discuss metrics and think about how we can measure success, what that could look like for scaling impacts across these 2 regions in Indonesia. And just seeing people stay late after a long conference day, fully engaged to figure out how do we actually do this together? We can make this work was really exciting and something that I'm excited to keep working on as well.
Yeah, thanks, Katie. Despite the difficulties with this and some of the global trends we see out there, which can be quite discouraging, I think we all see some amazing examples of commitment and passion and really, really hard work to address this on the ground. Rachel, what's inspiring you?
Yeah, in my work at McDonald's, what inspires me the most is seeing how our company can make this work happen across our giant global business. So like I said, we're operating in over 100 countries. We're feeding 70 million people a day. 1% of the world's population comes in every day to McDonald's restaurants. And in order to meet targets like this, it's complicated and difficult. And it requires a lot of engagement from people across the business. So people who work in those countries, people who buy palm oil, people who manage quality expectations, who do legal aspects of the work or treasury. Everyone needs to come together to make sure that we can do this as a global business. And what I've seen is that we can do it. And while it's difficult and challenging, we can do this at scale. And it's not a pilot project. It's not something that adds cost and is impossible for business. It's something that's practical for business and possible at scale. So it gives me hope that we can do this work as a company, but that we can drive change and other companies can join us as well.
So you're inspired by real concrete progress.
Yeah. At scale around the world. Yeah.
Yeah. Jose Roberto, how about for you? You're muted, Don Jose.
Sorry.
There we go. Go ahead.
A few years ago, we quickly realized that forest doesn't stop in our boundaries. And therefore, we need to go outside of our fence in our conservation efforts. Through our SPO compensation process, we decided to invest, well, we have to invest $500,000 to conserve the forest. And fortunately, our CEO decided to double that amount to $1 million. And in 2018, we found a place in the Biosphere Maya, which is a very important site in Guatemala and also in Latin America. That is, I guess, is the second one in terms of conservation. And we were thinking how to do it, and of course, we know how to grow palm oil, but we need help, and we found WCS and CONAP in order to develop a long-term project in the community of Paso Caballos, which is located in the Biosphere Maya. It's a long story, but I would like to say that we, almost in our first year, we invest in the community, in education. We support to build a new school. We invest in health. We support a female nurse that speaks Quechua, which is a language in Guatemala, to provide family health care. And then we work with the community in order to do fire preservation. We support the communal system to prevent forest fire by clearing fire breaks around every lot. And thanks God, the first year of the project was very successful. And I would like to take this opportunity to invite all the companies, NGOs that are willing to help us, because the project is very big. It's more than 10,000 hectares that we really want to support. It's 1 million, but disbursed in 25 years. And I really need help. We really need help, and I'm willing to hear a good story from any other place.
Thank you, Jose Roberto. We've got some more questions coming in here, so I'm just going to go straight to those. Rachael, one for you here from Nira Jory with Rich Products, who's mapping his supply chain, diversified product portfolio. So leverage is quite spread out for them across many suppliers, and they haven't gotten much response from the suppliers, not as much as they would like. What do you recommend in a case like that, where they're only getting to a certain portion of those? How do you deal with that at McDonald's?
Yeah, and we have the same issue of probably many companies struggle with that. There's sort of this, what we find is that there are a few suppliers that represent a larger volume of our supply chain, and then a long tail of suppliers which have smaller volumes. So there's many of them and more difficult to influence. So I would say start where you have the most influence and start now. Don't wait to figure out the rest of your supply chain. Start moving what you can move, and you can have a lot of success quickly with those suppliers. And then I think for the remaining suppliers, integrating this into your business processes may be a way to get more leverage with them. So especially whoever is buying the product from those suppliers and managing the relationship, integrating it in to their business processes like supplier reviews, purchasing protocols, raw material specifications would be a way to get more traction. But that may take time and a lot of training and engagement. You may have to do visits on the ground, and it all will build over time. One thing that we've done to get at those volumes that we are not sure that we will be able to get directly is to calculate those remaining volumes based on sales, and then using that calculation, cover those with RSPO booking claim certificates until we're able to get at the direct supply chain and start purchasing a physical supply of raw material through those supply chains. So I think you're not alone in that, and there's a lot of different ways to address that issue.
Great, thank you, Rachael. There's a question here. Katie, would you like to try this one? It's a really easy question. What steps can be taken to address the challenges in the emerging markets like India, China, and Thailand? I was joking. It's a really hard question. So away from Europe and North America, how is CI looking at that wider challenge and those very rapidly growing markets? Yeah.
That's
Asia,
a great question, and I think still a question that we're all kind of struggling with and trying to figure out as we go. And I think one key area is I mentioned this earlier, is that collective action piece. Working towards scaled sustainability in real places. So it doesn't matter who's sourcing in that region. There's that you're getting a product that is D4 free, is exploitation free. And that's one area where we can support global sustainability outside of just the North America market. And then I think there's also a key engagement piece in demand countries. We can kind of learn from places like Europe, where there's a lot of engagement on the demand side, and what are policies and regulations that can help against imported deforestation. They're obviously very advanced in this area, but I think there's something that we can learn from and collaborate around in other places as well. Yeah, but that's still, it's something that we definitely need to put more energy towards in this next decade for sure.
Yeah, thanks, Katie. Rachael, McDonald's is obviously very present in many of those markets. I know in China, you're got a very substantial presence, for example. Do you have the same policies in all of those markets? And what are you learning from that might help us think about how to achieve greater change in those places? And you're muted, I think, Rachel.
Yes.
Sorry.
Yes.
There
My
you
computer
go.
was just yelling at me. Yes, so we're operating in China, in India, in Thailand, and our policy applies to all of those locations. And they're buying RSPO certified palm oil in all of those locations today. So it is possible, it's happening. And so I don't really think there's an excuse just because countries are in different locations around the world. Sometimes the reality of the local business is different, and you do need to tailor your plans for the realities, absolutely. However, some version of the work, as long as you report it transparently, publicly, is possible in all of these locations. And I would just mention that Thailand is a palm oil producing country, and we've been on the ground there visiting some of the work that the Thai palm oil producers are doing, and I think they have an amazing story to tell of conservation, supporting smallholders, and there's really a rich story in Thailand. So I don't think it at all is something that's negative in developing countries or better in Europe. I think that is a misperception.
Yeah, thank you, Rachel. We're going to start to wrap up now, so I'm going to ask each of our panelists to just share any closing thoughts or comments that they have and give them a couple of seconds to be ready for that. And maybe we can start with Jose Roberto. What would you like to end with? Go ahead.
Okay, I would like to take this opportunity to well, in these difficult times where we learn new words like pandemic, epidemic, quarantine, social distancing, etc. And we recently heard flatten the curve. And I will strongly suggest to all the audience and all the people in North America to flatten the deforestation. I would like to hear that more often. And most important to that, I really appreciate if we can increase the consumption of CSPO, because on the ground, we are trying to do our best. All the people is offering a lot of CSPO, but unfortunately, the demand is below the opposite. And that really helped, because we can talk about deforestation, not deforestation policy, but if at least 50% of the palm oil that is going into the North America is not certified, is something wrong that we have to work immediately. And I would like to say, shared responsibility is the key right now in our SPO and our industry.
Yeah, thank you, Jose Roberto, and I would like to echo that as strongly as I can. Yeah, so there's so much concern about this issue. We all share responsibility to address it. Everyone needs to be stepping up to help grow the demand and support what the producers are trying to do. Katie, last thoughts, go ahead.
I think key moving forward is thinking about this idea of collective action and what each of our roles are, and addressing deforestation, addressing the climate crisis. We all have a role to play. That's what collective action is about. And I think, that sounds so simple, and it's not even a new idea, but it's so necessary. And it's in practice, it's really hard work, but I think it's worth it. And in the end will help us with those scaled impacts that we're all working towards.
Thanks, Katie. And obviously RSPO is a great venue to be engaging and learning about some of those collective action opportunities, right?
Yes, definitely. RSPO, GCF, there's many out there working on various initiatives, and I'd be happy to follow up with anyone who wants to learn more.
Great, thank you, Katie. And Rachel, the last word from the panel, please go ahead before I hand it back to Cameron.
Thank you. Yeah, I would just say that if you're a company on this call and you're using palm oil anywhere in the world, you should be taking action right now, and that we can all do this. There's a lot available, and like the other panelists said, we all have a responsibility here and something that we can contribute. So I'd say take action and start today if you haven't. Thank you.
That's great. What a perfect way to end. Thank you so much, Rachel. Thank you everyone for joining, and thank you to the technology for working perfectly. And with that, I'll hand it back to Cameron. Go ahead, Cameron.
Great, thank you, Nigel, and thank you, Katie, Rachel, and Jose Roberto as well. I know I've said this at the end of every panel, but I could probably listen to this for another couple of hours, so sad that we have to end where we are, but thank you so much. This was a really great, engaging panel. And thank you to all of us for joining us for the session and for all of the questions. Sorry we weren't able to get to all of them, but we'll try to answer a few of those offline if we can. And again, if you have not registered for the other sessions, we do have another one starting at 2 p.m. today. That will be discussing how banks, investors, and the finance sector can impact sustainability. And we hope you'll join us for that session as well. You can find information on the RSPO website under the events section if you have not registered for that event, or the other two panels that will be taking place tomorrow as well. So thank you again to all of our panelists and Nigel for moderating, and thank you all of you for joining us for this dialogue session. Stay safe, and hopefully we'll see you at the next sessions.
Thank you, Cameron. Bye, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.